Hello and welcome to Season 5, Episode 17 of Conservation Conversations with BirdLife South Africa. I'm your host, Christina Hagen, coming to you live from Cape Town. It feels a bit odd coming to you on a Wednesday evening rather than our usual Tuesday evenings, but this is the second in our special series of webinars as part of the build-up to the South African Bird Fair, which is happening this Saturday. We have over 160 episodes of Conservation Conversations recorded and available on YouTube. So if you've missed any episodes, you can always catch up on our YouTube channel. Please do also subscribe so you can receive updates when we post. We are on all major social media channels, and you can use the hashtag Conservation Conversations to let us know what you think of the show. We aim to keep these webinars free for all to learn and enjoy. So if you do enjoy the series and can contribute, no matter how small an amount, please do consider donating. You can donate through the BirdLife South Africa webpage at the link on the screen, or you can scan the QR code to take you there directly. Otherwise, you can also EFT BirdLife South Africa and use the reference webinars and your name. And thank you to those of you who do continue to support us. Now, the annual BirdLife South Africa raffle is live, and you can stand a chance to win an 8-day, 7-night birding trip for two to Brazil. You can visit our website, www.birdlife.org.za/raffle for more and to enter. So as I mentioned, the South African Bird Fair is happening this Saturday, the 24th of August, at the Country Club Johannesburg in Woodmead. You can join us for an amazing day of birding talks, walks, and exhibition stands. And of course, we'll also have a film screening and various kids' activities and our popular wind down quiz. So please do join us if you are based in Gauteng. If you are not, you can also join the live stream of the event for free. You can head on over to our website to register. That's birdlife.org.za. Now, excitingly, as part of the Bird Fair, we are offering a special membership discount of 15% off if you become a member between now and midnight on Saturday, the 24th of August. If you've ever been slightly tempted to join us, now is the time to join BirdLife South Africa. And you can also stand a chance to win a pair of Zeiss binoculars. Before we get on to tonight's webinar, I just wanted to say a few words about the rest of the series, which is just one webinar left, which will be tomorrow, where we will be hearing from Keith Barnes about his new book, The Birds of Greater Southern Africa. And so if you've registered for Conservation Conversations, you'll automatically be registered for this talk. And we had a great talk by Fancy Peacock last night, so if you missed that, it is up on our YouTube channel. Now, tonight we are joined by Peter Kaestner, who will be sharing his birding journey with us. So Peter is a retired US diplomat, having had a 36-year career and living in 12 different countries. He's an active independent birder who's spent a lifetime sharing his passion. On the 9th of February this year, he achieved his supreme goal when he saw his 10,000th bird species, which was an orange-tufted spiderhunter in the Philippines. And as of April this year, he has birded in 190 eBird countries and territories and holds the record for the world's life lists in eBird, 9,850, and on IOC, 10,013, which is an amazing achievement. Peter has a very long list of birding achievements. He has also been recognized as the first person to see a representative of every bird family, a feat that he accomplished in October 1986. But the highlight of Peter's birding career came in 1989 when he lived in Bogota, and he discovered a bird new to science, which was I'm probably going to mispronounce this, but Cundinamarca antipita. And I hope we'll hear something of that this evening, Peter. And Peter's committed to sharing his birding passion by writing articles, leading bird walks and tours, supporting local conservation efforts, and, as he is tonight, giving illustrated lectures on birds around the world. So, Peter, we're honored to have you with us and very excited to hear what you have to say. So, yeah, please start sharing and you may start your talk.
All right, very good. Um, anyway, I just want to say a couple of words before I start the talk. One of them is to say, well, first of all, I'm looking at a ruby-throated hummingbird, a downy woodpecker, and a chipping sparrow at my bird feeder, which
Oh,
is just
wow.
on the other side of the computer screen. So if I get distracted occasionally, I've got oh, there's a red white-breasted nuthatch just came in. Some birds you don't get in Southern Africa. But
No.
no, I've had a long association with South Africa. I visited there in 1978 and had a wonderful help from many people there, including Ian Sinclair, who showed me a spotted eagle owl nest near Cape Town, and somebody that I've never remembered his name. He was a young person studying the bald ibis, and I stayed with him for a couple of days, and he showed me the bald ibis and also buff-spotted flufftail, which is wonderful. It was singing in his garden. I lived in New Guinea in Namibia for 3 years and had a lot of contacts with people. We used to have off sort of hen plumaged chestnut weavers that were coming to our feeder. So people could come up. Chestnut weavers are very easy when they're breeding, but when they're not breeding, they're very tough. So
Mm.
people used to come up from South Africa to see the chestnut weavers at our feeder when they were not breeding, when the weather was a little nicer, including Fonzie Peacock, who just
Uh-huh.
spoke yesterday. He came and stayed with us with his family. So uh, that was a wonderful opportunity. And during that time, I met Adam Riley. And since I've retired from the State Department, I've been working part-time with Adam's group at Rock Jumper Bird Tour. So lots and lots of connections with South Africa. And we'll be coming back to South Africa in less than a year to go back to Namibia and also visit South Africa for probably the 10th or 11th time. So I feel a strong connection with South Africa. I'm very pleased with what BirdLife International and BirdLife South Africa do, and I know that Adam and Rock Jumper are very big supporters of BirdLife also. So without any further ado, let me do what I came to do. So obviously, you know what the theme of the talk. Oh, let me just say one thing. I hate doing this. I love speaking. I adore speaking to people, but talking to my computer is no fun at all. So let me just preface that I'm doing this under extreme duress just because when I speak, I get the energy from the people I'm speaking to, and I really love interacting with the audience, and it is very difficult. Thank you. Somebody just sent up a heart. Thanks so much. Anyway, my I do not have a spark bird. A lot of people have spark birds where they see a bird and say, "Oh, I want to learn more about birds." But for me, it was actually my older brother who had a spark bird when he was 10 years old and I was 2. You can see on the left-hand picture, I'm the baby in my brother Hank's arms. And to a certain extent, I've sort of been that way for a long time. My brother Hank is one of the top 10 e-birders in the world. I had a long career buying spices for the McCormick Spice Company. I had hoped to be an ornithologist and was talked out of it largely by a good friend of mine who thought that if I became an ornithologist, that I would lose my hobby. But I've obviously taken birds very seriously. You can see in the middle there where I was in the Peace Corps in what was then Zaire, now the eastern part of the Democratic Republic of Congo. And it was just in the most perfect place in the world to be stationed in the Peace Corps. I was a few hours from the Ituri rainforest. I was a couple of hours away from Lake Albert. I was less than a day's drive away from the Ruwenzori Mountains. Um, it was just a wonderful place, and I did a lot of recording. In fact, a couple of years ago, I was in Namibia, and I heard a woodland kingfisher off in the distance, and I wanted to point it out to my wife. So I pulled up eBird on my phone, and I was going to play the woodland kingfisher as an example of what I was hearing so my wife could focus on the call. And I saw that the recording in the Cornell Laboratory of Ornithology is one that I did in 1976 when I was in the Peace Corps. So it's a great example of how you can contribute and how those contributions can last and last and last. Now, I have one final story that I have to tell you on this page. And since you guys are mostly from Africa, you'll understand this better than most of my audiences. But my brother Hank is not only an excellent birder and was a wonderful older brother and mentor, birding mentor for me, but he's also a spectacularly good speaker. I am a trained biologist. I tend to stick to the facts, but my brother has a way of spinning tales that enthrall people. And some years ago, Hank moved out of Baltimore to Vermont, and he had been giving a talk every year for about 20 years to a retirement community. And he asked me if I would be willing to talk to that community that he was abandoning. I said, of course, I'd be happy to. So I went over and I gave them a talk about the birds of India, lots of pictures of beautiful birds of India, amazing stories, some nice cultural things. I thought it was a great talk. And at the end, I encouraged questions, and this tiny, tiny woman, she must have been 90 years old, puts up her frail, frail little hand. And I say, yes, ma'am, what can I do? And she says, every time Hank came and talked, he almost died, but you didn't almost die. So I had to tell them some stories about almost dying, although I kind of almost died in India once. But anyway, so I have to tell you a story about almost dying so that in case any of you all are interested in some excitement, we'll get that over and done with. That Cape buffalo up on the upper right is standing in the Virunga National Park in eastern Zaire. I had gone there the first Christmas holiday in the Peace Corps. So this would be Christmas of 1976. And we were staying in a small safari lodge, and they said, don't leave the safari lodge. It's impossible. It's forbidden to leave the safari lodge. It's very dangerous. But I could see out the back of the safari lodge is a well-worn trail where all the locals went down to the river to do whatever they do down at the river. And since I was a Peace Corps volunteer, I think of myself more as a local than an expat. And I said, well, look, if they're going down to the river, it can't be that bad. So go out to the road and start walking down. You can see there's some gallery forest down in the valley there. There's a river goes through that, and the road crosses that gallery forest. So I decided to go down to the bridge, do a little birding, but there was a Cape buffalo. And I decided that I would just mind my own business, and the buffalo would mind his own business, and we would just have just a fine day. So I was walking along, and the buffalo was grazing and not bothered at all. When I got to the point where I was the closest opposite the buffalo along the road, the buffalo picked up its head, started snorting and pawing the earth, just like they do in the movies and in the cartoons before the bull charges. And I said, oh my God, I'm dead. So I quick took a picture. So when they found my mangled body, they would know what happened to me, and then froze, and then very, very slowly moved backwards away from the beast. And he went back to foraging, and I went back to the safari lodge and never left the safari lodge again on foot. All right, people talk about getting 10,000 birds. When I was in university back in the early 1970s, the world list of birds is pretty stable around 8,600. Now there are over 11,000 species. And as in a good example of how that happened, in 74, there were 12 species of tapaculas. Now, not a great example for Africa, since tapaculas are a South American bird, but there are 12 species in the genus. By 2006, there were 38, and now there are 49 species in that one genus of Cytholopus. Some of them have been split, some of them have been new species discovered, but it just gives you an idea of just how much opportunity there is for increasing the birds. I was just reading yesterday that apparently somebody has suggested that there are 35 species of white-breasted wood wren. And so it is absolutely crazy, absolutely crazy. Now, I decided when I was in college that I was never going to be able to compete with the top birders. So I made an effort to try to see all the bird families rather than become a real world lister. Back in those days, to get information, there was a great book called Finding Birds Around the World by Alden and Gooders. But most of it was knowing people like Hugh Buck, Ben King, Salim Ali in India. And does anybody know the guy with the pipe? The guy with the pipe is actually a pretty famous guy. His name is James Bond, and he is the original James Bond, who is a ornithologist that worked in Pennsylvania and was an expert on the Caribbean birds. So I joined the Foreign Service after the Peace Corps experience and had a wonderful first time. Two interesting things here. One was my brother Hank came to visit me on almost every one of my foreign assignments. He didn't come to Afghanistan because I wouldn't been able to see him anyway. And I think that was the only one that he missed. But when he came to India, we went out birding with a guy named Bholu Khan in Bharatpur, which was a wonderful experience. And then finally, this is a very typical experience in the early 1980s to be driving along and seeing a carcass of a large mammal, usually a cow, and there would be literally scores, if not hundreds, of vultures sitting around the carcass. Or as you can see in the background, some of them with their wings expanded that have had their fill and they're just sort of sitting around feeling good, soaking up the sun. Sadly, an analgesic, a veterinary analgesic called diclofenac was introduced in India in the late 80s and 90s. And in fact, it's sold now, and it's the active ingredient in Voltaren, if you all have that in South Africa. I have a somewhat sore knee, and I use it regularly. And it turns out that diclofenac kills vultures. And in India, people were giving diclofenac to the aged cows so that they would have a more comfortable end of life. And then when they did die, the vultures would eat them. And unfortunately, it caused the near extinction of all the vultures in the South Indian subcontinent. Fortunately, it was understood. And interestingly, in 1997, when I was in Namibia, I was contacted by some researchers that had figured this out. And I was actually involved in getting the US Embassy involved in India to contact the Indian government and make them aware of this problem. This is what birding was back in 1982. I was on a quest to see all the bird families, and there was nobody that I could know of that had ever seen an ibis bill in the wild. But I did have a book that was published in 1953, the year before I was born. And in that book, there's a photograph of the breeding habitat of the ibis bill, which is an a monotypic family in southeastern Kashmir. So using that information, I trekked 50 kilometers up over a 12,000 foot, so that would be almost 4,000 meter pass down into the Wardwan Valley. As I was going down, this is the first week in September, the Gujars, who are nomadic tribes people who spend their summers in the upper valleys, which is basically part of the Tibetan Plateau, and then come down in the winter. And after this 25-kilometer trek up over this tall pass, I got to the Wardwan River, and I saw in my mind's eye the same perspective as the photograph that was in the book. I could remember exactly how the picture was taken, and I suddenly realized that I was at the place that they described as the ibisbill habitat. And lo and behold, right in front of me was an ibisbill. Now, it was late in the afternoon, and obviously it's a very terrible picture, but it really was a remarkable experience. Now, as I said earlier, I was trying to find bird families, and I was able to do that in 1986. And I was able to do that largely because of the help that I got from Robert Ridgely, who is an ornithologist that specializes in Southern America, and also Joel Abramson. Joel Abramson was the owner of Bird Bonanza's bird tour company, sort of the first real hardcore international bird tour company. And Joel had come to Zaire, to the Congo, while I was there, just when I was leaving, and I took him around. And I noticed that everybody on the tour that I was leading had affidavits. And when Joel would see a Turaco or a woodhoopoe, he would get everybody to sign off that he had seen that, because he had been corresponding with the Guinness Book of Records for years, because he was going to be the first person to see all of the bird families. He wrote a letter to me in early 1986, and he asked for information about finding the kagu, which is an endemic bird found on New Caledonia. And I gave him that information. And in that process, he told me that he was planning to see his last family in October of 1986. He was going back to Madagascar for the third time to see a ground roller. So knowing that, I zoomed off to South America and got my last ones on the 1st of October. I sent Joel a postcard and showing what nice people birders are. He sent a letter to the Guinness Book of Records and said that I had the record, so I did not have to claim it. And when Guinness asked me to justify, to give the records all the backing data for my claim, I said I could do some of it, but I didn't. I wasn't doing it with the intention of getting into Guinness. And because of that, they accepted my record. Another big time in my life was meeting Kimberly. And you can see in the middle, Kimberly's in the red shirt there. She did her bachelorette party in northern Michigan in the US. And they went and saw the Kirtland's warbler. There's a monument to Kirtland's warbler in the town of Mayo. It's still there. And on our wedding day, on July 11th, 1987, my brother Hank said, "Hey, Pete, let's go up. We'll go up to northern Michigan. We'll get the Kirtland's warbler. We'll leave at like 3 or 4 in the morning. We'll be back by lunchtime." So I went to Kimberly and told her about our plans, and she said, "No, no, 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 no. You're not driving 8 hours on our wedding day to northern Michigan to go bird watching." And it's literally the only time that my wife has told me not to go bird watching. So as a memory of that, when we moved to Columbia in 1988, we got a cat and we called him Kirtland. So it would be a constant reminder that she had gripped me off and seen the Kirtland's warbler, and I had not seen Kirtland's warbler. Now, while I was in Columbia, and I was there from 1988 to 1990, one day I was off doing some embassy work by visiting some American missionaries. And on my way back from that trip on Sunday afternoon, I stopped off on the side of on a side road to a place called Monte Redondo. And I heard something that I didn't recognize. And for me, that's not too rare. Until eBird came along, I was not a really intensive birder by ear. But it was interesting enough that I not only recorded it, but I stuck with it for 45 minutes, taping it ever and ever closer before I finally got a view of it. And I'll play this. I actually embedded a sound in. This is the call of the Grandinamarca antpeda. And this recording that I just played to you is in eBird. And that is the initial time that that bird was encountered by a white person. I mean, it's very possible that some indigenous people knew it. I don't know. But certainly in terms of being new to science, that was the first encounter. And you can go into eBird on the 16th of October, 1989, and go to my eBird checklist and actually hear that initial encounter that I had with the bird. And at the end of it, there's a description of what the bird looked like. It was I knew it was a new bird for Colombia. So I made a full description of the bird that I was looking at on the tape. Now, ironically, shortly after leaving Namibia, after being in Southern Africa for 3 years, there was an opportunity to go to Antarctica in 2002 when I was living in Brasilia. So I came back to South Africa, had a wonderful, wonderful trip. We went on the Agulhas and we went to Marion and Island and then down south to the pack ice. And it was a fabulous trip, very, very successful. But one of the interesting things on the way back, I had gotten it into my mind that we were going to see Atlantic petrels. Now, nobody else thought that we were going to see Atlantic petrels. And it became a bit of a joke that every day I would be out looking for Atlantic petrels, and most of the others would be sitting around having a beer or talking to friends or whatever. It was, the trip was basically over. We had seen the emperor penguin, we'd seen the snow petrel and Atlantic petrel and lots of albatrosses. We had a great time. But I just was going to see an Atlantic petrel. So on the trip was an artist named John Gale, and he made a full-size painting of the Atlantic petrel, and they stuck it on a stick, and they went down the poop deck, and then to play a trick on me, they stuck it up like it was flying by, just to sort of rub it in that I had spent all this time looking for Atlantic petrels. And remarkably, I was just at the UK Bird Fair in August or July, so the end of July, and I saw John and was able to take this photo in the upper right corner in front of a plate that he had done that included the famous Atlantic petrel. And we did see Atlantic petrels in the end, so I had ended up having the last laugh. In towards the end of my career in the State Department, I had a wonderful year in Afghanistan. You can see the top picture is me and my security detail. Took a lot of pictures on concertina wire. And let me go back. There was something I just saw on the BirdLife website, something about a roller that had been satellite tagged in Uzbekistan and had gone to South Africa. And that, one of the very first birds that I saw in northern Afghanistan, which is very close to the Uzbek border, was an immature roller. Unfortunately, I just saw that a minute ago, or I would have put it into my slideshow. Had a truly amazing time. I joined the Foreign Service because I wanted to travel and I wanted to live and work overseas. But it was a truly remarkable experience. If any of you ever have the ability to represent your country, it is a truly humbling and momentous thing to do. And to be a U.S. diplomat for all those years really, really was a true honor. And I saw a lot of birds. Now, one of the big differences as at this point in my life compared to back in the 70s where you had to know people to get good information, there's amazing amount of information all about the world and it's really, really amazing. eBird is amazing. I do not use iGoTerra, but there are also regional and local bird apps and databases that are very, very, very helpful. I retired in 2016, they said after 36 years. And the first thing I wanted to do is to take Kimberly down to down to Australia and New Zealand. And we did the um, uh, well, what they call the Subantarctic Islands cruise out of New Zealand, which was really, really fabulous. And other things with Kimberly, we went to the Galapagos, which if you ever get a chance, I know it's a long way from South Africa, but it is a truly remarkable place. And here's a place much closer to you all. But this picture of Kimberly and the lemur is I keep it on my phone because it is so enigmatic of her. Um, any woman who gets a 5 or 6 kilo animal lands on her head completely by surprise. He jumped from the back and landed on top of her head. And she thought it was the funniest thing that had happened to her all day. So that is definitely my kind of woman. Very, very, very happy. And we had a wonderful time there. I almost cleaned up. I still have 2 birds I need to see in Madagascar. I've been there 4 times. One of them is the Oriole vanga, and the other one is the Singi wood-rail. So I'll be back one more time, at least. Another thing that Kimberly and I enjoy doing is going scuba diving and birding, and it worked perfectly in Micronesia. We were able to go diving together. I was able to get almost all of the endemic birds, certainly all the possible ones. The upper right picture is a remarkable place I had never heard of called Nan-Mandol, Nanmandol. It's a, gosh, it's a archaeological place that is built out of basalt crystals that were somehow transported tens of kilometers from where the basalt lived or where the basalt occurred, and then was put into this amazing city in Micronesia. It's one of the wonders of the world. I had never even heard of it. Truly, truly amazing place. Now, in 2018, I was getting close to 9,000 birds in eBird. And so what I did is I went to Lesser Antilles. And the reason I did that is because I really wanted to get 9,000 in Puerto Rico. And the reason for that is the year before they'd had 2 devastating hurricanes. My mother was not born in Puerto Rico, but grew up in Puerto Rico. And also, Puerto Rico is part of the United States, and it's very poorly known by American birders. So I wanted to get a little publicity for them. So anyway, we got that. And then at that point, I decided that it was time to try for 10,000. And the first thing I did was to move my data from eBird to the IOC list, which gained me about 200 birds. But still, what I had to do is to make a plan to see the last 800 to 1,000 birds. One of the first things I did after having been retired from the State Department for a couple of years, I contacted Rock Jumper and have been working as a part-time bird tour guide for them. I really enjoy, Rock Jumper is a super, super professional organization. I love working with them. I have a sort of an odd niche. I am not a top flight young birder. I used to be. I'm now 70 years old, so I'm sort of an old man of the group. I enjoy sharing my experiences, sharing my stories, and helping people find new birds. So it's a lot of fun. Back in those days, sort of last 5 years or so, as I'm sprinting towards 10,000. Spent a lot of time in Indonesia. Actually took, I think I'd said earlier, I'm not really a professional photographer, but that picture of the kingfisher turned out pretty nicely. A couple of things. The fish, the clownfish, and the tarsier and the pitta are all taken on the island of Siau, which is in northern part of Indonesia, north of Sulawesi, and it's a place that nobody ever goes to. And it's really interesting. I got off the ferry by myself, and there's a guy there. Guy comes up to me. He says, "Hi, I'm a bird guide." I said, "What the heck?" Yeah, they probably get one bird person a year that goes there, and this guy just meets all the fairies, unless somebody told him. I guess it's possible somebody could have been somehow following me or figuring out where I was. But anyway, so he took me down. We saw the Sial Pitta, which unfortunately was just lumped. I can't believe it. One of my very best birds on my life list was just lost. It's now considered part of the Sulawesi Pitta. Another interesting thing, during the lockdown, I started doing iNaturalist, which is a way of recording nature. You can record birds there, but I don't. I record all of my birds in eBird, and then I also transfer my data into iGoTerra so that I can do a calculation with the International Ornithological Congress list, which gives me about 150 more birds. But one of the things I've been doing is identifying other things, fish, plants, or whatever. And this begonia on the lower right of the screen was photographed in Sanghi Island, which is not too far from Sial, north of Sulawesi. And it turns out that this is the first photograph of this plant ever taken in the wild. It was known from herbaria specimens, but it was not known as a wild plant. And I did take this picture, and someone in iNaturalist, a botanist, pointed out that it was a unique photograph. Since then, I think it was in 2003, there was some sort of an expedition back there because there are all of a sudden a whole bunch of iNaturalist photographs of that plant from the same place. Just before the lockdown, literally days before the lockdown, I did 3 trips for rock jumper in Southern Asia, and we saw the ibisbill after having trekked 25 kilometers up over a 3,800 meter pass. Now you can literally see it from the roadside in northern India in the wintertime. And now we know that the birds leave Tibet in the winter and spend the cooler months along the base of the Himalayas, not too far from Corbett Park. One of the interesting things here in the bottom right is a selfie with Jayoti in the middle. And the guy on the right is Ansar Khan, who is the son of Bolu Khan. So had a wonderful time working with him. He was the local guide for the northern India rock jumper tour that I led, and we just had a fabulous time working together. His father, just last year, I think, got a Lifetime Achievement Award from the Rajasthan Ministry of Environment. Now, one of the things, if you're trying to get to 10,000 birds, you definitely need to spend time in South America. The picture on the newspaper, in 2017, the Colombian government and the guerrilla group FARC had a peace treaty, and the Colombian government wanted to bring immediate economic development to rural areas that had been inhabited by the guerrillas previously. And someone at the U.S. Embassy in Bogota knew that I was interested in birds because she had worked for me earlier. So she contacted me, and for about a year and a half, I was a sort of a non-paid consultant to the Colombian government, trying to help them with some ideas on boosting ecotourism in rural areas. And we had the sort of culmination of that effort was a paradiada diplomática, where I led some people. And unfortunately, the photograph that they used for one of the stories that they wrote is a very unflattering view of my butt. But I guess you can't worry about stuff like that. The last thing I wanted to point out on this slide is look at the feet of that booted racket tail. Hummingbirds usually have black feet. You can see the hummingbird just above has black feet, but this one has evolved to have white feet because the black feet would just mess up his little white pantaloons too badly. I discovered a new species of ant pitta, and one of the reasons I think that I worked so hard to see that bird was that I have always thought that ant pittas are wonderful birds. They're a great challenge. They're not terribly pretty, but they are very, very difficult to see. And at this point, of the 73 species of ant pittas known, I've seen all but 8 of them, and hope to track down those 8 in the near future. One of them, however, is called the elusive ant pitta, and I think it's only been seen by 1 or 2 people ever. It's a bird that occasionally shows up as a herd bird, but actually seeing it is very, very, very difficult. Again, we were talking about how birding gets done. One of the wonderful, wonderful transformations in birding has been the development of local guides. When back in the 70s and whatever, I did some guiding for Bird Bonanza. And for example, I was in Colombia for a month. Steve Hilty was the main guide, who's literally wrote the book on Colombian birds, and I was his assistant. And we never had any local guides that helped us for a whole month. So everything that we saw were the birds that we had found. But nowadays, the local guides have developed so wonderfully, and it really is a fantastic evolution in world birding, and something that even if I'm in a place where I don't need a local guide, I always hire one just because I want to support the local guides wherever they are. One of the things you'll notice about this is that my brother Hank appears in a lot of these pictures, because we do have a lot of experience overseas. Another thing I've been trying to do recently is to spend more time helping young people. And it's always been a very satisfying and rewarding time to see the next generation. There are some truly superb young birders coming along, and it's a real pleasure to help them in any way I can. Now, during that Paradiada Diplomatica, there's a guy named John Myers, who was the guy that organized it. He is an American citizen that mostly lives in Colombia and does environmental work. And if you look at the upper left picture, you'll see that I've taken a selfie, but I'm not smiling. I always smile when I take selfies. But this one, I'm not smiling, because this is the spot where on October 16th, 1989, I first laid eyes on the Cundinamarca ant pitta. And I went back in 2022, and there was nothing left. It was a cattle pasture. Now, John had written to me and asked me what I was doing to help preserve my bird. And I said, well, I'm not doing anything, but I guess I should be. And he said, yes, you should. So he organized this trip down. And it turns out that a family that owns a tiny little finca up in the mountains above Guayabetal, which is maybe 30 kilometers from where I discovered the bird, they, during the lockdown for COVID, had started trying to feed my ant pitta, and they were eventually successful. So I was able to go in 2022, some 32 years after I'd last seen the Cundinamarca ant pitta, and saw this beautiful animal coming to feed on worms at the Herrera family. And there's another angle to this, and that is the Fundación Camaná, the group in the upper right-hand side, a wonderful local environmental group based near Villavicencio, Colombia. And they had made contact with Herrera family, and they had done a lot of things to sort of get ready to promote this bird feeder, and to find ways to increase awareness of the plight of the Cundinamarca ant pitta as it was losing its habitat very, very quickly. When I went down to visit them in 2022, they said, Peter, we need $70,000. And I said, well, I don't have $70,000, but I know a lot of people that might be able to help you. So after I came back to the United States, I put together a little proposal And I am not in the proposal business, so I mean, I just sort of made it up as I went along, and shopped it around to a couple of NGOs. And the American Bird Conservancy thought it was a great fit for them. And literally within 18 months, they have a very substantial refuge for the last habitat of the Cundinamarca antpitta, the last known habitat of the Cundinamarca antpitta. So the future now is looking very, very bright. And anybody can go and see the Cundinamarca antpitta at this antpitta reserve. Now, after that, again, sort of heading off, showing what I do when I'm not trying to save birds. Kimberly and I went to Aldabra Atoll. Aldabra is an interesting place, has some good birds. Amazingly, the rail there with the white throat is a flightless species, and yet it is considered the same species as a rail that lives in Madagascar that is flightful. So how can you have a flighted bird and a flightless bird be the same species? It's kind of hard for me to understand. Anyway, the bird just above that, sunbird, you guys know sunbirds in South Africa. This is the Abbott sunbird. It's one of my shortest lived lifers. I saw it in May, and in October it was lumped with a Suimanga sunbird from Madagascar. So you win some and you lose some. Another interesting trip in 2022 was a cleanup to far eastern India. I was trying to get to 1,000 birds in India. The only countries I'd seen 1,000 birds in were in South America, so I was looking forward to that. My next 1,000 target is Indonesia. I only need 23 birds in Indonesia, so my next trip I should get to 1,000 in Indonesia too. Anyway, great trip. I was doing some photography of plants for iNaturalist one day, and got back into the car and decided to eat some trail mix. Now, I don't know about you guys, but when I eat trail mix, I do it very, very deliberately. The first, I eat all the chocolate, then I eat all the peanuts, and then I eat all the raisins. So I'd eaten the chocolate, I'd eaten the peanuts, and I was just down to the raisins. So I popped the raisins in my mouth, and only one of the raisins went into my mouth, and the other one stayed on my palm of my hand. That's odd. So I tried it a couple more times, and it kind of looks like it was stuck on my wedding ring. Well, it turns out that that was not a raisin. It was a terrestrial leech that had attached itself to my hand while I was photographing plants. Towards the end of 2022, I did 3 more rock jumper tours, which were a lot of fun. Kimberly was even able to come along on one of them in southern Argentina. And one of the most memorable trips was a ship where the entire ship were birders. They had about 150 or so, 155 clients, and they were all birders, which is really great. And because of that, we were able to do some things with the ship that otherwise the ship would not have done. One of the interesting birds that we got in the upper right is the Atlantic petrel, which is, I was told by somebody who had done that trip 20 times that they'd seen Atlantic petrels twice. And we saw like 8 or 9 of them. They were obviously, the Atlantic petrel had learned its lesson in 2002. So 20 years later, they all came over to see me east of the Falkland Islands. So that was a lot of fun. The picture of the shags, those 2 cormorants on the bottom, is for Kimberly. Kimberly, we were looking for a very rare penguin, which unfortunately eluded us. But as we were looking for the penguin, there were these beautiful shags there. And Kimberly said, "Did you get a nice picture of the shags?" And I said, "I don't know." So I stopped and took a little time to get a nice picture of the shags. So that picture of the shags is all because of Kimberly. If you have not been to Antarctica, go to Antarctica. It is, along with the Galapagos, it is one of the truly remarkable places of the world. The sights the birds, the animals are all truly, truly remarkable. So this last year, 2023, I did some sort of high-powered trips. I'd never been to Vietnam before, so I ended up with 44 lifers there. Between Vietnam and the Philippines, Kimberly came out and we did some scuba diving. You can see the dugong there on the bottom right, which is a marine mammal. Kimberly loves marine mammals, and had a wonderful time visiting some of the more remote parts of the Philippines, including Tablas. So the Durango, I now only am missing one Durango in the world, and that's the one on Mayotte. So I need, next time I'm in Southern Africa, or I guess next time I'm in Madagascar, I'll have to jump up to Mayotte and get that one. Also spent some time with mentioning before, I always go to Indonesia. The 9901 bird, the Javan blue-banded kingfisher, was 90%. Somebody had proposed or posited once that seeing 90% of the world's birds would be impossible. So that was a memorable time for me. In the picture at the bottom that tells an interesting story of conservation, and since we're having a conservation conversation, this is a photograph. There are four white guys standing in front of the red there. The very tallest one, then I'm in the sort of green hat, and then the guy to my left in the tan. Anyway, there are four tour participants, and all the rest of those people are the support staff. And we calculated that there are between 25 and 30 people that benefited economically from the visit of the four of us to the Maratas Mountains in southeastern Kalimantan to see a couple of endemic species of birds. And one of the things that is really important, people talk sometimes about the carbon footprint of international bird tours, but one of the things that is really, really important is when bird tourists go someplace, it gives the local people an economic incentive to protect the environment and protect the birds that the tourists are coming to see. And much like what happened in Colombia with the FARC, by developing bird tourism, it is a way of creating value for the environment and for rare birds that is really quite simple and quite effective. One of my last overseas trips in 2023 was to Brazil, where I got almost 20 lifers. One of the fun things about my brother Hank is he has this tradition of lucky stones. A lucky stone is a dark stone that has white that goes all the way through it. This one that I have in my hand, I had found in 2017. So 6 years earlier, I was birding in Ecuador and found it and thought of my brother. It actually has two white stripes on it. So I sort of think one for me and one for my brother Hank. And we had been looking, we were birding in far southwest Brazil, western Brazil. And in the morning, we'd seen a bird called the Manicure warbling antbird. And the warbling antbird, the Manicure warbling antbird, is a very, very hard bird to see. We did get some views of it, but had no chance to get even a crummy picture. And then after that, we went back across a river, and on the other side of a river, there's another species of warbling antbird called the Rondonia warbling antbird. By the time we got to the habitat of the Rondonia, it was hot, middle of the day. The forest was absolutely dead. Our local guide is playing the tape, trying to elicit some response. We'd been there for about an hour with nothing at all. I suddenly realized that I had my lucky stone in my backpack that I had found 6 years earlier. So I pulled it out and gave it to Hank. As we're walking along, he's holding it in his hand, rubbing it. And literally within no more than 5 minutes, a bird flew up and landed right on top of a dead bunch of sticks. Now, if any of you all have been in the Amazon rainforest, it is a green place. There are no dead things in the Amazon rainforest, apart maybe from a tree trunk on the ground or something, but you just don't see sort of dead bushes and stuff. Well, anyway, this bird came and landed right on top of the bush. You can see the photograph in the upper right, just absolutely perfect. Now, I don't necessarily believe in lucky stones, but I certainly do believe in my brother Hank's luck. Now, as I'm getting close to 10,000, I was not trying to hide the fact. The wonderful picture, or wonderful article was written by a woman named Jessie. Gosh, what is her last name? I've forgotten. By Jessie. And then finally, I was asked to write something for Birding magazine. Both of those were published, one of them in 2023, the other early 2024. Now, in the old days, birders would put their lists in a website called Surfbirds. And I put my list in Surfbirds as I was getting closer and closer. But in October, the Surfbirds website crashed. And as it crashed several times. I put my numbers up a couple of different times. And I noticed there was a guy named Jason Mann who had been posting his numbers, but over the years, the last couple of years, it had been around 9,600. And I really hadn't thought of him as a as somebody that was competing with me. But all of a sudden, in early January, Jason Mann's list went from 9,604 to 9,943. Now, how did this happen? When Surfbirds crashed, the only way to put your numbers out was with iGoTerra, which is another world birding website. But to do it in iGoTerra, you have to actually put in sightings. So he had obviously been doing that all fall or all spring, depending on which hemisphere you're in. So as soon as I saw that, I immediately snuck off to Taiwan. Now, in my article, I said that I was planning to see 10,000 birds in the summer. So I literally snuck off. When I was in Taiwan, I was not e-birding because a lot of people follow me e-birding. And I did not put any of my eBird records into eBird because I didn't want anybody to know that I was in Taiwan. And fortunately, I got Rob Williams, who is one of the rock jumper guides, had just been in Taiwan on a tour, and he gave me some extraordinarily useful information on where to find things. So it was really, really, just because of his help, I was able to do very, very well. Unfortunately, the day I was leaving Taiwan, I learned that Jason Mann, who only needed 57 birds to get to 10,000, was in Colombia, and he was seeing 10 or 15 new birds a day. I said, oh my goodness, I'm in trouble. But I did fly home. I arrived home on a Friday night at about 11 o'clock. And Kimberly told me that I had to immediately go back to the Philippines and get the last 19 birds I needed. And I called my brother Hank, and he said, absolutely. Not only was Hank so supportive, but he said he would even pay my ticket because I just could not let somebody, I couldn't just sit aside while somebody was going to beat me. So I got on a plane. I arrived Friday night at midnight, and by Sunday morning, 6 o'clock, I was flying back to Southeast Asia. And on my way, there's a guy named Pete Simpson who does all the ground operations, or not all, but pretty much most of the ground operations in the Philippines. I sent him my once list and said, can you organize something for Mindanao? I'll be there in 20 hours or whatever. And he put together a great trip. And fortunately, on February 9th, I did see my 10,000th bird, and immediately posted it onto Facebook. But 12 hours before I posted that I had seen 10,000 birds, a guy named Jason Mann posted something on a Colombian website claiming that he had passed 10,000 birds at the same time, actually beating me by a day. But the interesting thing is that because Surfbirds was gone, he had to put his actually had to put in sightings. You couldn't in Surfbirds, you would just say, I've seen 8,212 birds, and that's it. But in iGoTerra, you actually have to put in bird sightings, and then they count them all up. And when he did that, he ended up putting in sightings that didn't pass muster, let's say that. And it was interesting because I was in a one-star hotel in the middle of nowhere in Mindanao, and people all over the world started looking into Jason Mann because both of the claims came on the same day. It really sort of rocked the internet, and people started looking at both of their lists. In fact, I took 3 birds off of my list that I had taken off of my eBird list, but I'd forgotten to take them off of my IOC list. But anyway, so I lost a couple of birds, and it turns out this is a list that someone else did. I did not do this. I just copied it. But there are some things such as the New Caledonian nightjar in particular that was described in the early 1800s and has never been seen since. So for somebody to have that on their list is not a good look. So anyway, because of what happened, because of the improbability, in the end, Jason Mann took his claim down, and the result was this. And truly, truly amazing. One of the things that was crazy about it is that if this had happened 5 years ago, it never would have gotten as much publicity as it did. I mean, having a birding story on the front page of the New York Times is just absolutely crazy, absolutely crazy. And it's just, when I was in the Philippines, I was all alone. It looked like this guy had beaten me, and all of a sudden, scores of people all around the world came to my defense, started looking critically at both of our lists, and ultimately, the claim, the counterclaim went away. But all during this time, it is just amazing the support that I got, not only from Kimberly. You can see this wonderful sign that she put up. I actually arrived back home at 11 o'clock at night on Valentine's Day, the last hour of the day, and Kimberly had put this sign up on our front door. But it's just everybody who had supported me. It was just absolutely amazing. It just amazing. And when I look back on how I got to 10,000 birds, so many blessings of good health, the amazing luck that I had. I mean, being in the Peace Corps and ending up in probably the most interesting Peace Corps place in the world, being somebody born into white privilege in the United States, where I had opportunities to go to very good universities and get good education, and the assistance of so many people. I'd mentioned in the prelude the guy studying the bald ibis, Ian Sinclair, who gave me not only good information about South Africa, but also some great information about Madagascar. And a lot of people come to me and say, "Oh, yes, Peter, I'm not a great birder like you." I am not a great birder. I had a goal, and I worked very, very hard for that goal. But the American Birding Association says there are a million ways to do it. And there are many, many, many birders who are much, much better birders than I am. You know, again, I mentioned Fonzie Peacock, the amazing things that he is doing, promoting birding and his bird books for kids, his amazing artwork. Um, I I have my niche, and I was very fortunate. And in the end, I was able to be successful in my little niche. But everybody has their niche, and whether it's getting a Gauteng list or trying to see all the fluff tails or whatever you're interested in is just fabulous for me. So I want to say thank you and happy birding to all of you. But as they say on the television shopping channels, but there's more. There's more. Just in the last couple of weeks, I've learned that Joe Treasure, who is the guy that um, wrote the article that appeared on the front page of the New York Times, has gotten a contract to write a book called A Big Life, which is going to talk about world listers and my goal of seeing 10,000 birds. So keep a lookout for it, and hopefully it'll be available in South Africa. And that's it. Again, thank you all very, very much, and happy birding to all of you.
Thank you very much, Peter. What an amazing journey that you've had in your birding career and your life. That was fascinating, and yeah, certainly yeah, enjoyed your stories and your images and all your anecdotes. So thank you very much for sharing those with us. And you can see from all the emojis that are flying up, everyone else enjoyed them as well. And yeah, thanks for presenting on Zoom, which I know it can be quite um, sort of lonely to just sit and talk to your computer, but there were there were lots of us listening with rapt attention. So thank you very much. Um, there are quite a few questions, so if you're happy to go through some of them, we can
I,
start that.
I've got about an hour and a half before I have to leave.
Okay, great. Before we get on to the questions, I just want to remind everyone that we'll be back again tomorrow night with another talk, this time from Keith Barnes, who'll be sharing his information about his new book and sort of he's titled it Breaking the Birding Boundaries. So that's sure to be another interesting talk. So please do join us tomorrow. Okay, so on to some questions. There are a couple, well, quite a few asking about classifications. So I'm just going to read them to you, and then maybe you can kind of answer them kind of all together. So firstly, from Warren, have you stuck to a single classification system, or have you disagreed with certain classifications and either added or omitted a bird? And then Karen asks, can you please explain why there are more birds on your IOC list than the eBird list? And then from Ian Barber, who works for the RSPB and is one of our great partners, he says there's currently an ongoing project to try and harmonize the various bird lists from IOC, BirdLife International, eBird, etc. Are you worried you might dip below 10,000 when they finally come to some agreement? With a little winky face. So maybe you can say a few words about
Okay,
sort
no,
of
I'd be very happy to.
classification.
And I actually, when I was in university, I was studying bird taxonomy. And if I had not become a diplomat, I would have very likely had a career as a bird taxonomist. So it's something very near and dear to my heart. And let me answer the last question and make sure I don't forget the three, because I haven't written them down or anything. But the last question is a very important one. And there is a harmonization, the working group on avian checklists, WAGAC, and I have been following their progress very, very closely, and I've been in touch with several people that are in that process. Um, and it'll be a wonderful day when the major checklists are harmonized, and we only have to deal with one major checklist. But I actually have the opposite feeling about the harmonization. And this is the reason. I had published in January in the magazine of the American Birding Association my plan to see 10,000 birds. And my plan was going to culminate in the summer of this year in Oregon in the United States, what we call the lower 48. And we talk about the lower 48 continental United States. And there is a bird there that I, to this day, have not seen called a tufted puffin. It's a beautiful bird. It is probably the easiest bird for me to see new. And I've been waiting and holding that in reserve to be 10,000, much like I did with 9,000. And I got the Puerto Rican parrot in Puerto Rico. I was planning to do 10,000 in Oregon. But Jason Mann spoiled that. Because he was so close, I couldn't just sit around and wait for the summer and get the tufted puffin. So my dream is that the list does come down below 10,000 and I can do it again and get the tufted puffin as my 10,000th bird. So that would be the ideal, but it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. I was just looking, the IOC has a checklist that is increasing. And the latest update to the IOC checklist, version 14.2, is in the process of being promulgated right now. It's being rolled out. And I should gain about 50 birds in that process. So rather than slipping back, it appears that we're going forward and forward and forward. And I think that really is going to be the theme of the future, that the number of birds, the number of species is easily going to get to 15,000 and maybe even above that. It'll be that 10,000 will be as common as 9,000 is now. And there, 20 or 30 people have seen 9,000 birds. So 10,000, once the numbers get up big enough, 10,000 will not be that special. But fortunately, I always will be the first. The other question, why they're more in the IOC and the eBird, it's really just a question of policy, or taxonomy is often called an art because you have taxonomic opinions, and somebody will say, trying to think of an example, long-billed lark? Long-billed lark in southern Africa was split into 5 species: the Benguela, the Karoo, gosh, I can't remember all.
Yeah.
There, but anyway, it was split up into like 5 species. Now, some people will say, no, well, they're still all one group. Barlow's lark. There's a Karoo lark, which is a very red lark. And then in Namibia, there's an endemic lark called a dune lark, which lives around Walfish Bay, mostly in the sort of low vegetated dunes there. And in southern Namibia, in the Spergabit, there is another species of lark called Barlow's lark, which I had seen, and that was considered a 3rd species. So at one point, you have the Karoo lark, the Barlow's lark, and dune lark. And just now, the IOC is proposing that Barlow's lark is going to be lumped with the dune lark. So it's something that occurs over time, where scientists have a better understanding of the species relationships, what makes a species and what doesn't. In the old days, back in the 50s, there was a monumental species concept called the biological species concept, which works very well when birds are living together, but it works much more poorly when birds are separated or allopatric. So it's a very loose sort of a system, and it's all based on who believes what. And not everybody believes everything. So the fact that this working group on avian checklists is going to come up with a harmonized list is a miracle, is a true miracle,
Yeah.
considering how many different views there are on all these species. Now, what was the first question was, oh,
Have you stuck?
do I disagree?
Yeah,
No,
yeah.
I don't. I am very much a rules-based person.
Mm.
And in the old days, there was a lot. I remember you'd go on a bird tour, and the bird tour leader would say, "Oh, this is a split. Well, this is a split. This really should be a split." And the participants, the clients would all write it down on their list and add it to their list. And I have never done that. I have always gone with the list. Whatever the published list is my list.
Great. Yeah, thanks for that. Um, Now, next question also from Warren saying, I won't ask you whether you have a favorite bird, but do you have a favorite birding encounter? And then,
Well, both of them have the same answer, and it should be pretty obvious what my favorite birding encounter and my favorite bird are. They're the same, and it was the Cundinamarca antpitta that I discovered.
yeah, great. So Janet Bloom also asked, what is your favorite bird? So we've answered that one. Um, and she also asked the biggest highlight of all the birds you've seen, and I think you've also answered that one.
Yeah.
Um, and then Sarah asks, did you hear the orange-tufted spiderhunter and what does it sound like?
Yeah, it doesn't have much of a song. And it turns out that the local guide heard the chip. There's just a little call note. And again, this is one of the wonders of having local guides. He recognized the call note, so we knew that the bird was in the area. And there was a heliconia thicket, and we saw some movement in the heliconia thicket. We played a tape, and the bird popped out and saw it very well.
Great, yeah. And just to comment on the local guide, um, yeah, it's and there are a couple of comments in the chat as you were talking saying it's fantastic that you use local guides and BirdLife South Africa is yeah, very committed to building local expertise in guiding, and we have a guide community guide program which has trained I don't know how many guides in the last 10 years, but
Fantastic.
it's quite significant. So
It's great.
yeah, to any of our listeners, if you are planning a trip, please go to the Go Birding website where you'll be able to find all the local guides in the various regions.
Mhm.
So another question from Warren asking, have you seen a representative of every bird genus?
No,
Hmm.
I think there are about 70 genera that are left.
Oh wow. Okay. Not
Two,
not that many in the
2000.
grand scheme of things.
No, there are over, I think, what, 2,500 or so genera. So yeah, I've done pretty well. Some of
Yeah.
them are very tough. Some of them are very tough.
Hmm. A question from Shashi uh, saying, could you please tell us about your planned trip to Mongolia in 2025? Not sure how
Mm,
that's known, but
yes, I'm
yes.
I'm going to be leading a rock jumper tour
Aha.
with Mongolia, and it's a bird and snow leopard tour. We're going to spend, I
Oh,
think,
wow.
about 5 days at a camp that is a very good place to see snow leopards. So I'm looking forward to that. I have never seen a snow leopard, so it should be a lot of fun.
Absolutely. That I'm very jealous. I'm very jealous of a lot of your
I think
stories,
there's still
but
a couple of spaces left on it. It's almost sold out.
okay. Well, yeah, Rock Jumper is a great partner of BirdLife South Africa, so I'd recommend people go and check out all their tours and support them if you can.
Yeah, they are fabulous.
So Lynn asks potentially a controversial question. So because you've mentioned a couple of times about playing tape and asking whether you have any issues with using tape or any
I
qualms.
do.
Mm.
I believe that you should always have the interest of the bird's welfare in mind. Playing tapes is an important way of seeing things, especially on bird tours where people are paying money to see things and they expect to see them. But I'll give you an example. I was leading a tour in Argentina, and we were looking for a bird called the austral rail, and it's only known for a couple of spots, and it's critically endangered. And I told the group, I said, look, I'm going to play this tape until this bird shows, and then I'm going to stop, and that's it. And everybody got ready, and we played the tape. The bird came out, we saw it, and that was it. And several people later actually commented on that, because most of the people on the tour had cameras and they were all wanted to get better pictures, but I wasn't going to disturb the bird anymore so that people could get good pictures. If it's a common bird, a widespread bird, I don't mind that. But if it's something especially that is rare or endangered, or if it's in a place that gets a lot of birding traffic, where a lot of birders go to that particular place, then I think that we all must to keep the bird's welfare in foremost in our minds. I've been in several situations, many more than I would care to remember, of people horribly misusing tapes and playing, especially in situations where people are looking for photographs, and they always want the better and better and better photograph. And again, if it's a really common, widespread bird, you know, I don't like disturbing it, but it doesn't bother me quite so much. But it's certainly, if it's a rare bird, it just drives me crazy when people try to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the welfare of the birds need to be, yeah, paramount. Interesting question from Lazali. Have you seen both male and female of all the 10,000 species?
Oh my goodness, no. No, I haven't. And I don't keep track of which ones I've seen. And a lot of the birds you can't tell.
Yeah.
So many of the birds, for example, the Cundinamarca antpid, the male and female are identical. There are even a few birds of paradise where I've seen the female but not the male, and that's one where I would like to go back and make sure get the male, because they're so dramatically different and dramatically beautiful. That's a fun question.
Yeah. So there've been a couple of people who asked about your influences and asking whether Phoebe Snetzinger influenced you at all in your kind of quest for 10,000.
That's a good question. I knew of Phoebe. We corresponded a bit. I met her in the flesh a couple of times, and once very wonderfully, she was in Malaya, in Malaysia, the peninsular part of Malaysia, on a bird tour, and I learned that she was there, and I drove up and bumped into the bird tour and saw them. And then after the bird tour, she was still looking for a couple of birds, so I went and showed her those two birds that she was missing. I really enjoyed her. I wouldn't say that she influenced me, because at that point I was really quite focused on getting as many birds as possible. That said, I always held her in very high esteem, because as a birder, she had very, very high standards. A lot of birders have no. Let me put it this way: I'm careful not to go down the road I'm going down, because there are a million ways to bird, so everybody can bird their own way. But I was always very impressed that she was very careful to make sure that she saw the bird, that she knew what the bird was, and that she identified it based on her knowledge and her sighting of the bird. A lot of people put birds on their list because the guide says it is that, or because somebody else saw it next, when they were standing next to them. But again, that's fine for them. But in terms of my listing, to me, there's more value when people who are competing, especially, do have high standards in terms of knowing what the birds are and getting good views of them, so that they are sure that the birds that they are counting on their list are indeed those birds.
Absolutely. Isolde asks, how many countries did you visit to get to 10,000?
The easiest way to answer that question is kind of an odd one. eBird keeps track of where I've eBirded, and eBird says that I've been to 190 eBird countries and territories, as you had mentioned in the intro. In terms of United Nations countries, I don't know if I've counted them up recently. It's about 145 different United Nations countries, but it's 190 eBird countries and territories. For example, eBird counts Puerto Rico separate from the United States,
right,
but it's not a UN country.
Right. Fatima asks quite an interesting question. You visited many countries pre and post wars in those countries. How did you find any effect of the war on the birding, or well, that's what she asks. How did the war affect the birding?
I'm trying to think of any places where they're real. I mean, I was in Syria before the war, but I haven't been back since. Trying to think of any other places. I'm not sure I really have that perspective of having been to a place. I was in Afghanistan during the war. I was in Colombia sort of before it was really guerrilla. It wasn't a war where you sort of blow up things so much. So
Okay.
yeah, I've had a lot of experiences with war and violence, but in terms of being able to contrast, I don't think I can talk to that, I'm afraid.
Okay. So two questions that I'm going to link. One from Stuart saying, are there any South, and then in brackets, Southern African birds you still have to see? And then Isolde asks, do you have a favorite South African bird?
It's a good question. No, I think I'm pretty much good on Southern African birds. I've never seen the migratory African pitta. I've seen a form of the African pitta in West Africa, but if someday they split those, or if they lump the one in West Africa with the green-breasted, which is something they talked about, then I would need to see the one that breeds along the Zambezi River.
Okay.
Favorite bird. Favorite
Yes,
bird in South Africa.
favorite South African bird.
There's several. There's the Damara rock runner and the rock jumpers. All those three birds are all pretty much my favorite birds for Southern Africa.
Yeah, the rock jumpers are great. I love them as well. Another question from Lazali. How many binos have you gone through in your 10,000?
It's interesting. When I was young, we used to get binoculars called Tascos, and they would last for about a year, it seemed, and they were always falling apart. And I remember taking them apart and putting them back together, and the alignment was just absolutely terrible on them. We went through a lot of those. But since I've been an adult, I got a pair of Leicas in 1978, and then I had those for a long time. And then I got another pair in, oh gosh, guess it must have been the late 80s. And then another one where I was on that pair was a pair of 8x32s. And when I went on the trip to Antarctica, I realized that the 8 power was not enough to look for seabirds. So after that, I got a pair of 10 powers. And then the next iteration was a loan of a pair of Swarovski NL binoculars that I got about 4 years ago now. And those are the ones that I'm using.
Okay. So not that many.
No, when you get the really good binoculars, they tend to stand up for a long time.
They
The
do.
task cards were terrible. They fall apart all the time. But now that I've invested in quality optics, and a lot of people, wonder if it's worth the money to invest. But I found certainly in my life that, using them a lot, there's a value to it.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's just 2 more questions left, and then we'll wrap up. The first one from Michael saying, which country would garner you the most unseen species for you?
The most at this point is Indonesia. There's
Okay.
still 200 birds I haven't seen in Indonesia, and I've seen almost 1,000 birds there. So it's
Wow.
crazy.
Okay. Wow. And then Greta says, a wonderful presentation, thank you. And what is the next bird on your list that you want to see?
Next bird on my list. I've been invited to speak at a couple of bird fairs in Colombia in November. So I'll be going down to Colombia, and I hope to see either the Santa Marta saberwing or the East Andean antbird. There are only a handful of birds I haven't seen that are easy to get in Colombia, and those are 2 of them.
Okay, great. Well,
But
hopefully
they're coming slowly until I get back to Indonesia.
yeah. I guess when you get up to those sorts of numbers, they will come slowly.
Yeah. I do need 50 birds in Polynesia.
Okay.
So
Okay.
need to get there soon.
Yeah. There's actually just one more question that's popped in
Sure.
from Shashi. We can end on a conservation related note, saying any thoughts on the eradication of mice on Marion Island? I don't know if you know about the project, the Mouse Free Marion project that's underway at the moment.
I've heard about it. I have no idea what the status of it is, but I can say that I did a trip to the subantarctic islands of New Zealand, and on Campbell Island, they managed, which is a huge, huge island, larger than Marion. They got rid of all the invasives, and it was paradise. It was absolute paradise. So there has been sort of an acceleration, I think, in the last decade or so, where more and more places are looking to eliminate invasive mammals and plants. And it is a wonderful, wonderful thing. And it's just fabulous. It is absolutely fabulous. I can't wait for it to happen. It is so sad to see seabirds nesting in burrows, and then the mice just go in and eat the babies alive and stuff. It's awful. It's awful. So yes, as fast as they can get them, kill those little buggers.
Yeah, absolutely. It's such a kind of simple, it's not simple to do, but the action of eradicating the mice, and then you just let the birds do what they need to do naturally, and they can recover.
Yeah, it is wonderful to see just how quickly nature can take back the land.
Absolutely. Yeah. And thanks, Mark Anderson, our CEO, for putting the web address for the Mouse Free Marion project in the chat. So if anyone wants to go and find out more, you can head on there. But yeah, that brings us to the end of all our questions. Just quickly check the YouTube live stream. No, there's no questions there. So thank you very much again, Peter. That was fascinating, and I really enjoyed hearing all your stories. So thanks very much. And
Well, thank you very much for organizing all this. It's been a real pleasure to almost see some of my friends in South Africa.
well, it's been great to have you. And yeah, that's it from me this evening. But I'll be back tomorrow with another of our special Conservation Conversations episodes for the Bird Fair. But with that, yeah, thanks very much again, Peter, and thanks to all our viewers for joining us. And yeah, good night.
Good night. Thank you.